Welcome back to the Matchbook NFL podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Hussey, and joined, as always, now by Fortgang and Doug Kezirian. And the guys fresh off landing the Week 6 best bet double. Doug, of course, played the Falcons -6, and then after a slightly sluggish start, got off to an absolutely romped home. And Judah, those Bears alts, I was just talking to you off air before the listeners. How much did you play that up to yourself in the end?
Yeah, got out to 9.5 there. You're joking that obviously you go till the realized outcome, but I didn't get too crazy though. Obviously, that was a nice payout considering they closed as an underdog in that game.
Yeah, there was a weird move. Well, the morning of it would have been probably more predominant for UK bettors rather than the US bettors. But I know a few US bettors were shocked to see what that closed at Bears ending up underdogs in that game. Doug, talk to us a little bit about the week. It was great getting the Falcons best bet double landing between you and Judah. But just an overall picture for the NFL. I mean, obviously listeners will be frustrated if they didn't do well last week, just given the amount of, I guess, favorable winners, given a lot of the road favorites won, or all the road favorites won.
Yeah, I don't want to pull a muscle, pat myself on the back, but it was nice to hit some of these bets and get it going. You know, I've always felt personally I'm better in October, November than I am September, just because you start to see things and then there's going to be a market resistance. But the public did really well. Like you said, road favorites like the Falcons, 9-0 against the spread. Obviously, some much smaller spreads like the Bills on Monday night eked it out. But, the public's going to have these situations, these weeks. I talked to some odds makers writing a story just about it, and it was, you as an odds maker, you want like one big dog to win outright per week, right? Break up all the parlays. But this week it's been all or nothing. It was all chalk, on Sunday. But before that, it was all underdogs all week, right? What was that number? What was it? 5.5 points. Underdogs of 5.5 points or more were just dominating. So it's good to see, some of these better teams actually handle their business. Is it a sign of things to come? We shall see. I think it's just one of those things where things went right for 1 week.
Yeah, Judah, maybe just a point on Doug makes about time of year, and where do you find your most success? Maybe you haven't calculated that granularly yourself, but just in general as a bettor, where do you feel most confident? You obviously want as much information as possible, but maybe come week 17, 18, the market has a good read on these teams. Is this the sort of time where you can make hay when it's a small enough sample, but enough for you to go, yeah, this team is underrated by the market?
Yeah, I think kind of my best times probably like week 4, 5, 6. Okay. And then like a little bit of the tail kind of as you're saying now of just like being able to kind of dissect the data and do all that. But also I think there's kind of this assumption of like we know how teams are as we kind of progress later into the season, but teams also change. And I think there's some value in understanding and quantifying like, is this change just like a random kind of aberration because like that happens all the time in the NFL, or is something fundamental that's changing? I think we're starting to enter into that part of the season where, whether it's like post buys, teams operate their offenses differently, their defenses differently, they change their tendencies, and kind of dissecting that and seeing what's stable, what's not, which is the sample size that I kind of trust the most, does lead to some value in this time of the year also.
And yeah, as Judah would always say himself, don't be afraid to go down that alternative spread if you have a strong opinion on a particular game versus maybe trying to tackle loads of other games. We're going to add the London game in and make it a 5-game slate in our marquee games. What we do generally cover the marquee games, any other bets for the guys, particularly around the red zone games, long shots of the week in around a big price around 3.0-ish or above, and then best bet time. And as I mentioned, the guys landed the double there. Let's hoping for more of the same. Before we get going, if you hit that like button, follow or subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. Keep an eye on our social channels for Sam Farley's Bet Builder of the Week. That generally gets put up on a Friday morning in the UK. And also to check out our offers. The latest one is available on the Matchbook Promotions tab. Just enter the code POD50, bet £50, get £50 worth in free bets, full T's and C's on that aforementioned promotions tab. Let's start with the London game, Patriots at the Jaguars. Not a classic game for Wembley, and I can see the ticket prices have gone down. I'm thinking maybe this time last week or 2 weeks ago, they're in around the £170 mark. The cheapest ticket is now £70, and I think that is going down. So worth checking out if you want to lay ticket to the Patriots. 3.1 on the money line. The Jags, 1.43. The Jags are laying 5.5 now, 195. And the total for this game currently stands at 42. Doug, let's start with you maybe on the total, but just the game in general. There's a lot of question marks on this. There's a bit of wind and rain due in London, but also a brand new pitch at Wembley that people wouldn't have seen. A lot of football fans over in the UK would not have seen this pitch before. It'll be the first time ever being used, and it's going to be used on Sunday in this NFL game.
Yeah, and a lot of question marks, right? Is footing going to be the same? You know, like you said, it's at Wembley Stadium, not the previous venue for London. And, you know, in Brazil, the field was choppy. It was kind of like the Super Bowl with the Eagles and Chiefs from a couple years ago that was in Arizona. The footing was terrible, neutralized the trenches, and we saw a very high-scoring game. I think that's going to be something to keep an eye on right away in the in-game wagering because it's such a unknown going in, and maybe you can pounce. And obviously, the algorithms and everything won't have it stand a chance if there's something that's noticeably different or wrong with this new pitch, like you said. But I do wonder what we did to London to give them these two teams. But thankfully, for their sake, Jacoby Brissett is not the quarterback, so it won't be the Patriots in the first few weeks. At least there should be some more excitement on offense.
Yeah, and on that with Drake May, Doug, are you sort of in terms of the total? Can he elevate this offense enough that so the totals currently stand at around 42 at the moment? Can you see that going over?
I do.
Yeah.
We talked about the market with the Bears and Jags. Like, yeah, the Jags have some experience playing in London, but how did that treat them last week, right? So rookies, went over there and did just fine. And I don't know if Gerard Mayo's, calling out the defense is going to rattle the cages. I just think they're limited in terms of competence, and they traded two of their best players on defense at the beginning of the season. So I don't have a ton of faith in the Patriots, but I think they'll do enough on offense. I think the Jags offense is super explosive. Obviously, their body clocks will be adjusted staying over there. So I think the number is really kind of cheap on the total. I like the over. I know it obviously shot up a few points right from open, and the Patriots are presumably going to play to a higher number power rating wise and offense wise than they did the first handful of weeks of the season with the upgrade in quarterback. Or I think the upgrade. I just think the ceiling is a lot higher with Drake May, and I think it led itself over. So I just still think it's really low at 42.5 range.
Okay, yeah, and 42 on Matchbook, so we can lock that in at 188 currently Wednesday afternoon. We're recording. Judah, you went against the Jags heavily with the Bears. Now, obviously, as Doug has alluded to, their body clocks adjusted staying over in London. What did you make of Drake May's Patriots, and what do you make of this matchup coming into Wembley?
Yeah, I think definitely early signs are impressive for May, or at least relative to where the market's pricing. Right, it's one thing to sell the Jags. They're like 5.5 point favorites. Yes, they probably have some of that home field advantage by virtue of being in London, but they certainly don't have all of it. In as much as there are other factors outside of rest that create home field advantage, and the Jags have not been great, especially not on defense. And I think we can kind of price in a pretty decent upgrade going from Jacoby Brissett to Drake May, a particular area that I'm watching it. And you don't want to really use production-based metrics so much in evaluating one game. And we have 50 snaps of Drake May because he got a little bit of garbage time work against the Jets there. But an area which is, I think, particularly encouraging is almost we can try and capture it as processing rate, which is basically I call it disruption of plays that either are pressure that does not allow a quarterback to go through his progression, or perfect coverage. And you can kind of anticipate these things. And the biggest factor in disruption is the quarterback. What's good evidence of this? Jacoby Brissett and Drake May are playing in pretty much the exact same system. Jacoby Brissett did not have a week below 45% disruption. Also, just as a base rate, the average play on disruption would be negative 0.6 points, expected points added. That would be way worse than the worst offense in the league, whereas non-disruption plays are 0.6 expected points added. That's a 1.2 points per play. So even a 10% difference in sample there goes a really, really long way in deciding games. And Jacoby Brissett was hanging out basically between the 40 and 50% range. Drake May was at 33%. I don't think that's a factor of the Houston defense is particularly worse. That's causing that. I think it's something that we've seen from May and the limited sample size of snaps that we have from the preseason and even heading into this year. And that I think is pretty encouraging because this is one of the more stable quarterback stats. And in that, I think the Patriots are upgraded just by virtue of that, not to mention the fact that he obviously throws a great deep ball. and has some create ability, even if he's going to take plenty of sacks. All that is to say that I think it's a pretty big upgrade. And especially when you're looking on things like the tails, I'm not really interested in betting the 5.5 so much here, just because there's still so much unknown. I think there's a legit chance that May can take advantage of a Jacksonville defense, which has really struggled to generate pressure, has allowed a ton of explosive plays, and that's the sort of thing that plays into May's strengths, and I guess in some way can mitigate the Patriots' weakness on the offensive line. So I think there's a pretty good Patriots tails case, but given all the uncertainty and just like there's a chance that Drake May is still pretty bad and this is a bad Patriots offense, I'm not so interested in the 5.5.
Okay, so Doug is locking in the over 42. Judah leaning, if you had to, maybe on the tail, something like the Patriots money line, I take it, but not an official bet there. So that's the Wembley game, 2:30. Looking forward to that. Let's move on to Lions at the Vikings. What a game this is. The Lions coming off their big win in Dallas, 2.2 underdogs in Minnesota, who are 1.8. The Lions are getting a 2-point head start. The total here is 50. Judah, back to you here. I mean, is this a good spot it probably is a great spot for the Vikings coming off the bye. The Lions having that massive game, not in prime time, but what was effectively game of the weekend, and bringing out some of the trick plays at the end. It's a big high to come down to, come into Minnesota here, and also back-to-back road games as well.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of kind of competing factors here. I think on Minnesota side, their defense has been very good. There's no doubt about it, but it has also certainly been propped up by turnovers on a kind of yard-based metrics and things that are and also I should say, like, it is not a coincidence that Minnesota has so many turnovers, right? They play in a very aggressive style of defense that we shouldn't just like say, oh, all turnovers are random, all turnovers are variant. They are more likely to get turnovers, but that isn't to say that it is like fully a function of their defense, and there's certainly some luck and variance involved. I think that's true. It is also true that the Vikings have not played in a negative game script. And we really don't have a sample of like what is Sam Darnold going to look like when he has to play from behind and when things aren't going so well. And Sam Darnold is a particularly sensitive quarterback to his situation. So game script matters. If the Lions jump out to a lead, that matters. On the flip side, the Lions defense, I think, has been surprisingly okay. Aiden Hutchinson was having one of the better edge seasons we've ever seen through 6 weeks. He was basically carrying the team on his back. They're down both of their edge guys. They lost Marcus Davenport earlier in the season. I think that's going to have some ripple effects. Their secondary has been great, but that also has to do, like, the secondary play is not divorced from the defensive line play. And when you lose Hutchinson, there are ripple effects going across the board. So I don't really know what to make of the Lions defense. Then again, in a game where I think the offense can score, they can beat anyone. I don't think that the Vikings defense is that big a barrier to their success. But we've also seen the Vikings have dominated everyone this year, and they're coming off the bye. They're healthy. They should be a full go. It's ultimately a pass for me. I think it's a fascinating game, and there are a lot of interesting kind of angles to monitor.
Okay, ultimately a pass for Judah. Doug, you are going to go for Minnesota here. I mean, Judah mentions the injuries. If Hawkinson comes back, it's pretty much a full complement for Minnesota.
Yeah, I just think I'm with everyone in trying to pick my spot to fade the Vikings. Obviously, they're not going to run the table. There's going to be some regression with Sam. I know, yeah. I guess there always is one team, right? Every handful of years. They're catching Detroit in the right spot. I've talked about it before. I think Detroit, the praise for them off a loss is really nice. They've won and covered 9 straight going back like 2.5 seasons. But can they play with success and things like that? They were all in on last week's game. I mean, they were not messing around with the offensive linemen declaring eligible, trying to get revenge from last year, that crazy ending with the referees. And I just wonder if they can sort of go back to back, situation here. Not that I would be stunned if Detroit won the game here outright. I just think Minnesota off the bye will be I just wonder if Detroit will match the intensity. And I think Jared Goff is a okay quarterback, but I just think this is a terrible situation for him against this defense that's really confusing a lot of quarterbacks. I think Goff's going to be backpedaling and kind of be off a little bit all game.
Okay, yeah. So money line Vikings, if you want to play that, it's 1.8 currently on Matchbook. So we'll lock that in for Doug. Judah sitting that one out. Let's move on to again another fascinating game. This should be an exciting, fun game to watch. Texans at the Green Bay Packers. Packers 167 moneyline favorites. Texans getting a 3-point head start on the point spread, and the total currently stands at 47. So let's throw this back to you, Doug. I mean, a lot of people looking at the underlying metrics because it's a big enough sample on the Green Bay Packers saying they're overachieving. Would you concur with that? And also looking into this game, where do you see this one going?
See, I think the Packers are ready to hit a stride right now. Jordan Love coming off the injury had to adjust a little bit. They won a couple games with Malik Willis. I think they're in bet on form right now. I think they're in a good spot to back them. I think they're going to catch Houston at sort of a depth. See, I think Houston's like Detroit. I don't think they're a team that plays well off success. They finally covered a game. They've been really shaky against the spread all year. If I can get under 3, if I can get 2.5 or better, then I'm definitely on Green Bay. At 3, I'm just a lean, but I do like, especially a situation like Matchbook where you can put your price out there. I think the Packers get them here. On paper, this is probably a really tight line, but I think Green Bay's in a really good form, and I think Jordan Love's finally healthy.
Yeah, you mentioned Jordan Love finally healthy. So just Matchbook line there, -3 is currently 2.02, as Doug alluded to there. You can put up your price that you want to potentially be matched at, and it'll be interesting to see where that market goes between Wednesday and Sunday. Judah, same sort of thing to you. I mean, where are you with the Green Bay Packers? Jordan Love did some insane stuff, particularly that 4th down play. Is it sustainable in the long run? Does it have to be this weekend?
Yeah, so I think kind of to Doug's point and to our earlier points about things change in season in ways that we can't just use the average. We actually have to kind of context adjust a little bit. Jordan Love is going to get healthier and get reacclimated to gameplay. It's one thing to struggle, kind of rushing back from a knee injury in your first game, and then kind of as the season goes along, as he gets healthier, as he gets more reps to improve. I don't think that's so fluky. I think he's also in a pretty great system. I mean, we saw what Malik Willis did. I think that the kind of floor of the Packers offense is going to be very high. That said, he does play an extremely variant style, where a lot of his yardage, I mean, he has more yardage than any other quarterback percentage-wise coming via explosive plays. This is something that we saw the Packers kind of change their offense to in the second half of last year. They had plenty of success with it, but by nature, that is something that is pretty variant week to week. So I think on the whole, when I look at the Packers offense, I see this as a unit that's probably pretty good and going to improve as Love improves and as the wide receiver room also gets healthy. They're dealing with some injuries right now. Christian Watson just came back. Dontavian Wicks now is questionable. Those things all matter. In this particular spot, I think we're also seeing the Texans, who got off to a little bit of a sluggish start in the first couple of weeks. CJ Stroud was taking sacks at a 10% clip, which was a bit of a worrying sign. That's way down over the last 3 weeks. His time to throw has also been adjusted to that. So I think there are some promising signs there. I think this is a pretty even matchup. Kind of as Doug said, on paper, the margins are pretty thin. I think it's a particularly high variance game just by the nature of how each of these offenses win via explosive plays. I think the Nico Collins injury matters a lot. I guess if I had to choose, I would lean Houston, just because I think that they have the edge defensively, and can cause Love to be in a little bit more chaos, though it is an admittedly weak lean. I am not going to be betting this one. Another game that I think is super, super interesting. I think we're going to learn some valuable information from.
Okay, lean for Judah on the Texans and a lean for the Packers -3 or less. Sorry, less if you can get it for Doug as well. Let's move on to Seahawks at Falcons. I mean, this should be a fun game to watch once again. The Seahawks are 234 on the money line with the Falcons 171. The Seahawks getting a 3-point head start. The total here currently sits on Matchbook at 51.5. Judah, back to you. I mean, Falcons are starting to look good on offense, and obviously the Seahawks are very explosive and can also be very good on offense as well. It should be a fun game.
Yeah, I think sadly the kind of storyline here is the injuries. I mean, the Seahawks defense is littered with injuries. They are going to get back Byron Murphy, their defensive tackle, who's missed the last 3 weeks with a hamstring injury. But right now, Tariq Woolen looks doubtful to play. Trey Brown looks doubtful to play. Their cornerback depth is terrible. There's a reason that this total is at 51 right now. Even though each of these teams healthy, the total would not be close to 51 right now. I think that kind of dissecting these injuries is certainly not the handicapping style that I prefer, but I think is kind of the main storyline here. Geno Smith is not the type of quarterback you want to bet on in spots where he has to kind of create on his own and scramble. Atlanta's pass rush has been non-existent. I think that should help the Seattle offense. But yeah, I don't know how the Seahawks secondary is going to stop Atlanta right now, given the depth chart and who's healthy. So I would go Atlanta alts here just because I think they can put up a ton of points. The defense has done a particularly great job of limiting explosive plays. They are allowing one of the shallowest depths of targets. They are by far the best in this category. I think that is a schematic element that should remain relatively sticky. And I just don't see a path towards the Seahawks defense stopping Atlanta, given the state of this secondary.
Okay, so play the alts. Any particular one in to get you in terms of minus, say, 6.5, 5.5, Judah?
I think the minus 5.5 is where I'd start, just because I do see a scenario where Seattle can keep up offensively. So Atlanta would really have to score a lot of points to cover a wider kind of 9.5, 13.5 type of situation. I think 5.5 though is my favorite to kind of play on that tail.
Yeah, love it. Doug, points for you. You expect the offenses to take advantage of that, and of course the injuries that you mentioned on defense.
I mean, just going to piggyback, like I don't see Seattle offering any resistance whatsoever. And the way the Falcons just, they've offered no pass rush, like Judah was saying. And Geno, I mean, everyone's saying, and I'm by no means breaking news here, but Geno's been great with a clean pocket. And with this game indoors on the turf and those wide receivers, like I think this should be literally a track point. Like you said, points. Like I wouldn't overthink it. It's a big number for sure. And some of these big numbers like Washington and Baltimore last week barely got there. But I think there is resistance that we saw from some of those teams last week, and I don't think we're going to see any of it. And I think both offenses know. So unless it's going to be one of those games where fourth and 2 inside the red zone and they stall out or something like that, where coaches don't even want to take 3 points because it's going to be such a high scoring game, I think break it up a little bit, maybe first half full game. And then also any prop bets involving Geno. I think this is where he thrives, right? Indoors, no pass rush, clean pocket. I think they should be, putting up some serious points here.
Okay, 192 if you want to take over 51 and the Falcons minus 5.5 for Judah. Let's move on to the two best teams that are playing this week. Chiefs at 49ers, possibly the best two teams in the NFL right now. Chiefs 2.1, Niners 1.85. Chiefs getting a 2-point head start in San Francisco. The total is 46.5. Doug, back to you. Firstly, is the right team favorite here? I mean, Chiefs have a lot to fall back on, but the Niners seem to be gathering momentum, at least in the betting markets.
Well, it's always the kiss of death comment, right? If you say that, it never holds true. But sometimes we've seen, like last week, we saw favorites change throughout the course of the week in a couple games. I wonder. I've been very bullish on this Kansas City team. Like, obviously, the injuries add up with Pacheco and things like that. But Kareem Hunt for one game looked great going into the bye week in that game against the Saints. And they're a much more polished team with that defense. I mean, we forget this is Mahomes. Obviously, when you talk about Kansas City, you talk about Patrick Mahomes. But this defense has been really impressive. And Shanahan will scheme. And I guess the right team's favored, but I don't think – I mean, look, the market's the market, but I lean to Kansas City here. Is Mason, who's, essentially already a backup, is he playing for San Francisco? Shanahan will make it work and push all the right buttons and all that fun stuff, but this Kansas City team has weathered storms of injuries, and they look pretty connected, I guess is the word I was looking for.
Okay, so lean for Doug for the Chiefs. Judah, where are you thinking here? Maybe looking at the total of 46.5.
Yeah, I think I like the over here. It's taken some under action this week. I think kind of one of the main differences between the Chiefs this year and the Chiefs years of the past is they have previously struggled against the run. I think that is by design to try and we've seen a bunch of coordinators do this. Steve Spagnuolo has been doing this for forever, but this year they've actually been really good against the run and a bit weaker against the pass than they were last year when their defense was really terrific. I don't think that really matters that much in terms of the efficiency, just because of how good the Niners offense is. And when you kind of have an elite caliber offense like that going up against the non-elite defense, or at least one that can't match to the degree of how good the Niners offense is. I think that matters a little bit less. But where I do think it matters is in kind of the tendency, where I think San Francisco is going to, and especially considering the Niners running back problems, going to tilt a little bit heavier to the pass, which I think just plays to the totals. Number one, because San Francisco throws the ball deep a ton, and that can lead to the explosive plays that are necessary for the total to kind of to get over, as well as just like more plays that are incomplete passes, as opposed to runs for a couple of yards, or just added play volume for two great offenses to go over. I think the San Francisco Niners, the defense is a little bit overrated. They're also dealing with some injuries. Also, we'll see if Charvarius Ward is back. And I think this is not the same defense of kind of the 2018 to 2022 / 2023 version. You got two great offenses that I don't think the defenses are as good as the market perceives, in a game which I think should tilt relatively pass heavy. 46.5, given the 2024 game and like league scoring environment, I think is a little bit too low for how good these offenses are.
Okay, so that's a lean there for the over. Let's move on to any other bets. A reminder that insights.matchbook.com is a full recap of all the guys picked. You can check that out while we're checking out before Red Zone on Sunday. And of course, check out the Matchbook Betting Exchange if you want to do your singles, highly competitive priced on the exchange, as you know by now, but also you can do multiples with our new Bet Builder product. And some of the props, like Doug mentioned, if you want to do some pro Geno Smith props in the Seahawks game, do check that out. Some really cool lines and a lot of fun ways of going about it. So any other bets to start with you, Doug? You have a few. Where will we start here? We'll start with the Chargers. Why not? I mean, Chargers sneakily looking okay here. I mean, Justin Herbert, he has to keep himself fit, doesn't he? That's ultimately the key, I think.
Yeah, I think the Chargers finally, I think I saw a headline, Chargers finally realized they have one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I've been telling
people for ages, Doug, but no one wants to know Justin Herbert. But they keep playing when he's banged up, little things like that. It doesn't help him.
Yeah, it was a favorable spot last week against a Denver team that's kind of limited offensively. They're going to play a very slow pace, and they're going to want to bleed the clock, all things considered, and that can get out of hand sometimes when you face a team that has competent offense like Arizona does. But I like the Chargers coming into this matchup. They have the better quarterback. There was some early money. I think it's going to be 3 come Monday, maybe even like 3 with significant juice. I think we're going to see some points here. No Marvin Harrison, or he's likely out with a concussion. There's been defensive injuries for Arizona, and they were really banged up last week. And I think we saw the difference between Arizona and a really good team last week, evident at Lambeau. Now they'll be at home on Monday night, and it's a relatively tough place to play, but I think the Chargers will be buttoned up and they can handle their business. Arizona has a pretty low ceiling, I think. And I think we're going to see that on display on Monday night.
Okay, Chargers laying -2.5 at Arizona. Of course, we have 2 Monday night games. Well, let's move on to the Bucks Ravens now, Doug. You've got 2 bets here, so you can do this on Matchbook if you want to double them up in the same game parlay, basically, on the Matchbook Betting Exchange. I mean, the Bucks, so impressive. I mean, they won the game almost twice. They beat New Orleans, let them back into it, and then really impressed them the second half. Baker Mayfield largely impressive too, but also the running back combination that they have. So they've so many options at offense all of a sudden, it seems, and they take on the Ravens here.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, Baker Mayfield leads the league in passing touchdowns. Right. So, like, I think this Bucs team, that fiasco that happened a few Thursdays ago where they lost at the end of the game, this team really should be 5-1 in a lot of ways. And that one loss was a very good tool for the team moving forward. They were 2-0, had Denver coming into their house, and it was a 7-point spread. And Denver, wire to wire, dominated the game, and all the right comments you want to hear if you're a Bucs fan afterwards, saying, we didn't come to play in this game. We were fat and happy, so to speak. In this league, you need to treat everything like the Super Bowl and all that good stuff. And they've been solid. They're a really reliable team. I think this number in Baltimore is a team you don't want to really lay points with on the road. That's typically not who they are. I think coming off a big win, it's not the best spot to be back in Baltimore. So if you can get that extra half point, I think it's pretty good. And I do like the over a little bit. I like the +3.5 more. But this Baltimore team can give up some points too, as we saw with, Jaden Daniels, who played pretty well, all things considered, last week. So I think we're going to see some points. I think Baltimore's the right side. That's just too many points. I'll take the home dog here.
Okay, so Bucks plus 3.5. Doug prefers, but also if you want to play the over 48.5. Judah, Giants at the Eagle, or Giants hosting the Eagles. Is it fair to say both these teams are sort of coming from different directions and almost maybe meeting in the middle here? Because I mean, Philadelphia, we actually said it on the opening show, I think, this season, that how poor their finish to last season was, and they haven't started this season particularly well, albeit they beat the Browns the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, they just eked by the Browns coming off the bye. But yeah, I think that's kind of the right way of looking at this. I would really have liked this spot if we didn't just get news that Andrew Thomas was going to miss the rest of the season. I think that injury does matter a lot, but I still do like the Giants in this spot. The Eagles have struggled now for the better part of a year, and where Jalen Hurts is particularly sensitive is on these disruption pressures, on these plays where he can't really go through his read. And that's not really so much of a problem and hasn't really made a huge difference in the past when you have Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata, two of the best tackles in the league, kind of anchoring on the outside. But Jordan Mailata's out. And I should also just say on these plays, Jalen Hurts, on these disruption pressures, Jalen Hurts has a negative 1.2 EPA per play. That is a massive number, right? Think about like 2 or 3 more plays of that happening in this spot. That's like the equivalent to almost a touchdown. That's a huge number. And the Giants are number 1 right now in these pressure disruptions. They are really a boom or bust defense. They've been one of the best defenses in the league when they can generate pressure, and one of the worst when they can't. And they have the biggest discrepancy between those two. So you kind of look at the situation, and the Eagles are now going to be starting Fred Johnson at left tackle. Fred Johnson filled in for Lane Johnson against the Bucs. That did not go well for the Eagles. He allowed 11 pressures. He's one of the worst graded by PFF offensive linemen, and he's going up in a really difficult matchup. This is kind of the angle I can't stop thinking about just by virtue of how kind of pointed it is. So all that said, I think this is an Eagles offense, which, like, of course, AJ Brown and Devonta Smith can get going at any time. And on the Giants side, the Eagles defense has not been particularly good since Brian Dable took over play calling. The Giants offense has improved in basically every area you can think of. Obviously, now that Andrew Thomas is out, I think a lot of the pass blocking stuff is going to get worse, and it remains to be seen how they'll respond. I think these two teams, though, are fairly similar. And accounting for home field advantage here, 4.5 points is just a little bit too steep right now.
Okay, let's lock it in. Let's play the Giants there on the point spread and go to you, Doug, for the final. Any other bets? Miami off the bye against the Colts. I mean, it's looking like Anthony Richardson will be back from injury. Will he start over Flacco?
I think so. That's what the Colts are saying. If he's back from injury, I mean, I think they're playing the long game here. And this Indy team is still shaky on defense, right? They are one of the worst. Gus Bradley, they're just not a polished unit. And now Jonathan Taylor may return as well for Indy, but I think this defense, you have Mike McDaniel off a bye. I think Huntley should look noticeably better in this game, and those weapons. You have to think, I mean, granted, they grabbed him off the street when he played that Monday night game. You can't expect a ton. And then this supposed offensive genius calling the plays. I just expect this Miami offense to look a lot more competent. They have the weapons, but this Colts team is pretty much a tough one to figure out. But I think that's more Flacco just having his, so experienced, so knowledgeable about opposing defenses. I think Richardson's high variance, boomer bust with all plays. Like, he can almost make a deep pass better than he can make a middle of range pass more accurately. So I think it's just too many points. Miami should be fine. The extra half point is the right side in my eyes. I mean, to get 3.5 here with the situation I laid out with Huntley, I think it has to be the right side here.
Okay, let's lock in Dolphins plus 3.5, 185. And as mentioned earlier, check out insights.matchbook.com for a full recap of all the guys' picks from Thursday. Let's move on to the long shot time. Judah, Bengals at the Browns. I mean, have the Browns given up on the season? It just seems like third downs, they never quite make it. The simple pass and doesn't go to hand. Bengals, on the other hand, slowly getting their form back. I mean, they looked really good offensively for a couple of their defeats. And then last week seems like they just grinded it out. And Joe Burrow's obviously the highlight, being that walk-in touchdown.
Yeah, I think they did grind it out on Sunday night, but this is still one of the better offenses in the league. And yeah, I think the market is pricing in a Browns offense that's going to be able to take advantage a bit of how bad Cincinnati's been on defense. I also think Cincinnati's defensive weakness is certainly influenced by the opponents that they've played. I mean, we look now at Washington and Kansas City and Baltimore, and I think the story looks a little bit different when adjusting for who they've played. But that isn't to say they're a great defense. Whoever the Browns are playing right now, it has been a disaster, and I don't anticipate that changing. You can look at anything that they are doing schematically and or ways of capturing how their offense is being run, and it will reveal a story that this is a team that like cannot take advantage of how good or bad a defense is. They're just kind of like shooting themselves in the foot. I mean, like 55% of plays right now is an enormous number. Or these disruption plays. Anything you look at, this Browns offense is atrocious, and that matters when you're thinking that a point spread, because right these spreads do not only reflect the fundamental value between teams, but real points in real games. And if you are like on the struggle bus to score 17 points, going up against a pretty explosive offense, if the Browns can score 10 points, which is like basically what they've done in every game when they're not scoring defensive touchdowns, then like not that much needs to go right on the Bengals side. And I think the Bengals also play perfectly into the strengths of, or their offense plays into the weakness of the Browns, who, by the way, are also dealing with some serious secondary injuries. Grant Delpit's going to be out now. They basically just have Myles Garrett right now and very little else, and Denzel Ward perhaps. And Cincinnati is an offense that is very explosive. Joe Burrow has some of the best deep ball metrics, whether it's Joe Burrow or Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, it doesn't really matter. Those guys are all healthy. And Cleveland is a team allowing one of the higher explosive play rates in the NFL. They're allowing one of the higher pass depth of anyone. They have the most explosive attempts against teams who want to be attacking downfield, and that's exactly where Cincinnati can beat you. And not only that, that's precisely kind of, if you connect on a couple of those, how points can kind of stack up real quick. So you add up a team where I think the market's probably right in terms of the fundamental value of 6.5, but just looking at the nature of these teams and how this game can play out, I think there's a lot of value on these alts because of Cleveland's inability to score many points, and Cincinnati can certainly rack up points quick, even if the Browns defense in total is probably priced about right.
Yeah, not gonna lie, would concur with that. Do like the Bengals alls after that case from Judah, so for what that's worth. Doug, Vikings alls versus the Lions. We mentioned it's a good spot. We mentioned the Vikings are getting healthy off of bye against the Lions that maybe played a lot of their game last Sunday.
Well, I want to preface it by saying I like Judah's long shot a little bit more than mine now that I think about it some more, because you're right. The Browns are the ultimate variance team, and I think we could get that in this matchup. But there seems to be one game so let's go back to last year where the Lions had a back-to-back road games, and they went into Baltimore and a team that was super physical and just blew them out 38-6. Now, weather was more of a factor in that game, but still it was a game where Detroit just was flat and laid an egg. I think there's potential of that. Obviously, the Lions are a very good team, and we're going to hear from them by the end of the season in the playoffs. But this could be where just the stars align for Minnesota, the red zone defense. I talked to a few modelers. I'm curious to hear what Judah says in terms of, the home field advantage is obviously a thing of the past. Like when I was a kid, it was, 3 points, blah, blah, blah. But there are a few home field advantages, whether it be Orchard Park in January or December with Arctic temperatures, Arrowhead. And then there's also red zone noise. And I think the Vikings at home are pretty, or at least a variable in opposing, as an opposition. So I just think the things could line up where Goff lays a serious egg. And I'm not, this Detroit defense, obviously losing Hutchinson, and then the pass defense is pretty shaky. I think the Vikings could have a big game. So if we're looking at payout and variance and odds, it's not the worst thing to lay an alt number here, but it would take a lot for Detroit to be, kind of dominated by 2 scores. But I think Goff can throw a couple picks here to lead to that.
Yeah, Vikings lane -9.5. Lions is currently 375. And Judah, before we get to best bets, I mean, home advantage in general, it is always tough to factor that in as best you can, I guess. I mean, I'll give you a quick example. Watching the London game, the minute the Jaguars came out, they were booed by the Bears fans. I think that threw a lot of people that, yeah, this is going to be a Chicago home game rather than a Jaguars home game, you know?
Yeah. I think kind of the Doug and the macro point I think is true. The home field advantage I think is treated as a bit more stagnant than it actually is. It is dynamic in ways, whether it's weather or any other multitude of factors. Rest. I think there's also been some compelling research that the thing that actually is most relevant respreads is like your net rest, i.e., like the travel over the previous 3 weeks combined, as opposed to just like what you've done in the past week. So yeah, there's a lot of I think lots of people are trying to study it. I think kind of the main things are that travel is probably the most important piece of home field advantage, not like home field influence, though that does obviously matter, and that there is a dynamic nature to it, and things change over the course of a season.
Okay, yeah. So watch when out and Lions are in the red zone in Minnesota this weekend. I will be thinking of Doug watching those plays. Best bet time, Judah. You're gonna go for the Commanders against the Panthers. You know, as a presenter, what I'm going to tell you. I mean, if you looked at this in week 1, how can you possibly back the Commanders minus 9.5 now? So make the case.
Yeah, well, the week 1 is like effectively irrelevant.
Yes,
none of us thought that Jaden Daniels would be putting up the numbers that he has. None of us thought that this is the offense that they'd be. Also, like on the Panthers side, it's a completely different team. Right, Bryce Young's no longer the quarterback. Ultimately, what this comes down to is I think that points matter, and the Carolina defense right now is so far and away the worst defense in the NFL. They're allowing like 35 points per game over the last few, and I don't think that's just like fluky. This team is a disaster, and Washington on the other side has been consistently moving the ball. It didn't change against Baltimore. I don't see why we're just gonna like throw our hands up and be like, hey, this week is the week they're going to stop being good, when every indicator points to this team being successful, and just like they can really front run you. They can score 40 points so easily, and the Panthers offense I don't think is good enough to take advantage of the Commanders defense. I don't think that like you just insert that offense, especially with the injuries on the offensive line. Granted, Washington now has lost kind of 2 of their better pass rushers in Jonathan Allen and Dorrance Armstrong. Though I'm not positive of Armstrong's status. That matters, but I don't think ultimately Carolina is good enough to kind of keep track with Washington and score the 30 points that I think would be necessary, because Washington is this is maybe the best offense in the league going up against the worst defense in the league, and you can cover with pretty pretty long margins, I should say, for when you have the type of offense that Washington has.
Okay, maybe it's one of the best offenses versus maybe the worst defense in football at the moment. I think the line is at around 7.5, but Judah's pushing with the odds to get that minus 9.5 real numbers, as he always talks about. 2.18, we'll lock that in as the best bet. Doug, I'd say you took one look at the Titans-Colts game last week on Red Zone, like most people, and thought, I don't fancy either of these teams, because that's where you've gone for a lot of your bets. So why are you laying the points with the Bills here?
Well, I've been dumb enough to take Tennessee a couple of times this year, so maybe I want my money back. But I abstained the first couple of weeks, and then I thought it was all cute and sticking the landing, taking them week 3 against Malik Willis, and then last week as well with all those injuries for Indy. Will Levis stinks. He's not a starting quarterback in the league. The team has a couple of weapons here and there, but Ridley's comments were pretty critical as reflective of a young coaching staff who does not have a handle of this locker room. So there's a lot to dislike right now with Tennessee. And then you say, hey, Bill's got a big win, short week. I know, but they also are coming off of back-to-back losses before that. They just picked up Amari Cooper. I think this is a team where Tennessee, I don't think, can take advantage of Buffalo's weaknesses on defense. I think Will Levis is a really bad quarterback. The more I watch him, the more inept he is. I think the coaching staff's in over their head, where Callahan had to get his dad to help out, to groom him. It's kind of like the NBA, where they hire these recent retired players and then they put an experienced coach under him thinking that's going to solve everything. Well, it doesn't, because there's a pecking order and hierarchy and things like that. It just doesn't work. That's why Steve Nash didn't last. That's why some of these other coaches have only been better their second time, like Jason Kidd. And we'll see what happens with JJ Redick and the Lakers. I don't think this coaching staff knows what they're doing. I think they're pretty inept across the board. And traveling to Buffalo, and the Bills should be able to name their score in a lot of ways with Josh Allen and company. I think it's a spot where I really favor the big chalk here. And frankly, I was really close to doing Washington as my best bet. I think Carolina stinks. Obviously, I was against them last week as my best bet. They're horrendous. And I think their adjusted win total for the season at some shops is 4.5. I don't really see 5 wins. They got to go to Denver next week. Maybe they have a couple home games here and there where they play the Giants, but this team, I think, could very easily lose out, and they want to. True, they need the number 1 pick. So I support both best bets.
Okay, yeah, they're big handicaps to overcome, and both you guys haven't put them up much this season, which maybe tells a lot. So yeah, Commanders -9.5, Bills -8.5, the best bet double this week. But I'd say more telling is the teams we're taking on: the Carolina Panthers and the Tennessee Titans. Yeah, happy to have lose my money if one of those teams manages to cover those totals. But insights.matchbook.com, full recap of the guys' picks. My thanks to both Doug and Judah. Fun one as always. It feels like we're picking up a bit of momentum throughout the season and getting better and better. Do enjoy the weekend football. If you're having a bet on Matchbook, enjoy it. Make sure it enhances that in viewing, but please do so responsibly. We will chat to you next week. Bye-bye.